whether if you want to join us at 5 after the lectures. There will be a concert and a picnic there. So you're all invited and then hope you will join us.
1st of July, right?
I don't understand.
No, it's this Saturday. The party this Saturday, although the
Could you repeat the first part? It was too loud.
there is a celebration, a party in the park, because Croatia is becoming a member state of the EU. So it's free. There will be a Croatian band, a concert, and after the lectures, we could all go together and just enjoy good weather and some Croatian music and picnic there.
In which park?
South Park. But we can upload more. Yes.
Somewhere. Yeah, but.
What about the park?
Park Południowy.
We could upload the directions there, or if we all go together, but we could do it on the Facebook page
yes.
of the summer school if you all use it. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
What about barbecue? You were asking on Facebook?
Today. Today. If you wish, but this is, let's say, non-governmental initiative. So if civil society would work the barbecue, we will enjoy. Okay, now let's turn to another interesting topic: European decision making, and let me introduce Professor Blagovesta Cholova from Universite. Okay. It's up to the context, up to the cultural manners, and let me introduce Professor Blagovesta from Universite Libre, Bruxelles. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you still have some energy before lunch to focus on populism and the European decision making in times of crisis. I just want to make a small remark before I start, since my presentation is a bit long. So please feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. You raise a hand, and please feel free to ask, because it will last probably a bit longer than expected, and we'll have less time for discussion. So please, if you have questions, don't be disturbed to ask. So Piotr already presented me. Just a few words. I'm a teaching assistant at the Free University of Brussels. I'm working on populism and center-right parties. Today I wanted to focus on this topic of populist rhetoric in times of crisis, because I think it's a topic that it's kind of less focused on during the crisis, but it's still very important, because in order to understand all the Euroscepticism and all the critiques of the European Union, we have to take a look as well on this populist strategy and the way it's used both on national and European level. So the content of my presentation, I will first make a very brief and short review on the European decision-making process. I believe you already had lectures on this, so you probably know very well how it happens, but just to introduce who are the actors and why this process is problematic for some of the political elite in terms of democratic representation and so on. Then we'll introduce a definition of populism, saying what is populism, how it is used by the different actors. Afterwards, I'll focus on the impact of European crisis on Central and Eastern Europe mainly, because I believe that most of you come from these countries, so it will be probably better to focus on this issue. And then we'll see how populism is used by different actors in times of crisis, and why it's so successful in terms of rhetoric. And then we'll finish with some conclusions on this matter. So first, the European decision-making process. Very briefly, I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but just as a reminder, I believe you had other lectures already on this topic. You have three principal actors on European level, like global actors, let's say, of course, who are involved in this European decision-making process: the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council. So these are the three bodies that really take the decision on European level. And probably, as you know, well, here I prepared like the path of one classical classical decision-making process, like the simplified procedure of it. So just to remind, well, you have different types of actors who might draft proposals or make negotiations with the Commission on different topics. It could be the European Central Bank, it could be the Citizens Initiative, it could be other actors on European level. Then the Commission proposes a text, a draft, which is then to be voted, to be read and voted and discussed in the European Parliament. So it's the first reading. Afterwards, if the European Parliament makes an amendment or not, then it goes anyway to the Council. So it's the first reading in the Council. If they both agree on this first draft, then the proposition is adopted. This is rarely the case, but sometimes it happens. If they don't agree, of course, if the Council also wants to make amendments, then the text goes for the second time, for a second reading, first in the European Parliament, then in the Council. And if they still don't agree on the second version of the text, you can have what we call the conciliation process, where well, actors from both the Council, the European Parliament, and the Commission meet together and try to resolve the issues that are not consensual and that make up the problem of decision making that block the process. So afterwards, if they don't agree on this conciliation, during this conciliation on a draft of this final proposal, then it's not adopted. If they do agree on the final text, it goes for the third reading in the European Parliament. Then it goes for the third reading in the Council. It might not be accepted as such or from one of these two bodies, which means that the proposal is not accepted. If they do agree on this third reading, well, finally we have the proposal adopted. So as we can see, the process is quite long. It might take a year, it might take even 2 years. Many different actors are involved in it, and of course, in the process, the first draft is really modified because there are a lot of different interests coming and that should be taken into account. So, what type of legal acts? Just a reminder as well, it's not really related to what we will see today as populism during the decision-making process, but just as a reminder. So we have the regulations, which is a binding legal act, which means that it must be applied as such in the entirety across the EU. This type of acts are rather less applied. Then you have the directives, which you all know, which is a text that obliges the member states to apply it, but they have a kind of flexibility in a way they should apply it. So basically, the basic principal guidelines are set as such, but every country can adapt it in its own legislation. Then you have what we call decisions. These decisions are concern only specific actors. They are not basically applied everywhere, but they may concern one country or one company, and these decisions need to be applied directly as such. Then you have recommendations. Of course, this is not a binding act. This is something that the Commission and the other actors at the European level recommend. It's a way of expressing view on certain issue, but without any legal obligation to be accepted as such. And you have opinions, of course, on different issues. So at the end of this global decision-making process, you end up with these 5 types of different legal acts. Then, once again, who are the actors that are involved in the process? You have what we might call secondary actors. They influence decisions, they draft proposals, but they are not in this process of decision making. They are outside, and they might just influence the final decision. These are the European Central Bank, European Bank of Investment, the citizens, the NGO association, lobbies, and etc. On different topics. Then you have the primary actors, the ones that take the decision or draft the final document, the European Commission, the Council, and the MEPs in the European Parliament. Then once the decision is made and the legal act is presented, the media informs the public, of course, in all the different member states. And then the public opinion may react to this act in one way or another. They may say that they do not agree with this act. They may make a strike, for example. They may even come to Brussels and make a manifestation on defending their right. We always we see that very often in those of us who are in Brussels. But anyway, the public opinion may react to this act. But if you want, the important thing here, and the important thing in order to understand populism is that the public opinion responds to the final decision. Public opinion is not involved on every step in the process. So basically, most of you as European citizens, you don't really know all the process as such. You just know the final act the way it is done after this process. So basically, what you have is a final document, and you don't really know all the interest behind how the discussions take place, and so on and so on, which might be perceived by some actors as non-transparent process, and this is one of the biggest problems. The other problem in this process, which might cause populist discourse, is what we call the shared responsibility, which means that like we don't have like a national government, or we don't have like in what happens in every country, a government responsible for this legal act, or a parliament that voted this act and a government that needs to implement it. You have shared responsibility, and on European level, you have both non-elected bodies responsible for drafting this proposal like the European Commission, and elected bodies like MEPs or prime ministers and ministers that are forming the European Council that have to take the final decision. So in terms of responsiveness, I guess you all know what is responsiveness. In terms of responsiveness, the elected bodies are the ones who are really responsive to the public. Why? Because, well, being a prime minister or a minister or an MEP, you have to, of course, be in touch with your electorate, and you want, of course, also prepare for the next elections. So you want to be to have some accountability with and some contact with your electorate. These are the bodies that really need to be more responsive to the public. In the European Commission, of course, people don't face the same issues, so in terms of responsiveness, they are not obliged to explain their proposal and their act. So, but in any case, it's a shared responsibility, because there is no one body responsible for the whole decision. As we saw, we have both the Commission proposing, the Council making the final decision, and the European Parliament also amending the document and voting it in the terms of this process. So you have in all these bodies a majority rule. Once the decision is taken, it should be taken by a majority. So basically, in terms of the decision-making process, it's a process of negotiation. And in this negotiation, very often, you have a compromise, and sometimes it doesn't fit none of the considerations taken on national level. So basically, you end up with a final act, which is sometimes problematic for all the actors, because it's a result of concessions, and it's a result of negotiation. And this is what we call shared responsibility, one of the basic issues in terms of transparency and responsiveness. And also, of course, between the different levels, you also have this difference, because sometimes on national level, it's very difficult to adopt and to introduce as such European legislation. So sometimes national actors are always tending to question these acts and blaming the other act. And the responsiveness comes very often by this strategy of blaming the other. On national level, one politician might say, well, it's not me, it's not us, it's Brussels. So Brussels imposed this directive, we have nothing to say, we don't have the power to change it. Which is in a way true, because this final legislation is a result of a negotiation and of a compromise. But on the other hand, these ministers or prime ministers were involved in the process because they voted it in the European Council. So this is a double-sided rhetoric, and very often we see on national level, for example, that these politicians would adopt the strategy of blaming Europe when the directive is not suiting the national electorate, but when it produces a good effect, then they'll say that yes, it's us. It's you, not Europe, it's us. We adopt it. We put it into practice. So this kind of shared responsibility gives them the opportunity to blame the other when there are problems and to say that it's more on European level. And they might say on national level that they lack power on European level. We know we are not a very influential country. We don't have in terms of the decision-making process, we don't have enough power to change this decision. And on the other hand, of course, they are involved in the process because they voted by, sometimes in the majority, of course, the national representative might vote against, but still the act is adopted. But anyway, this process and the lack of transparency in this process might cause this campaign sometimes on populist rhetoric saying, well, we have had enough of this power on European level, nobody knows who takes the decisions, it's always the others to blame and stuff. So we want to really focus on national level and really solve the direct and concrete problems of the people. And this is when populist rhetoric comes on the scene. So why use populism in these terms? Why it's a good tool? Well, populism first can be a way to voice protest. So we don't agree with the decision on European level. In one way or another in our countries it perceived as a bad thing or causing bad result. So it can be a populist rhetoric against a decision taken on European level. It can be also, by some actors, adopt this populist rhetoric against the decision-making process as such, saying, well, these people in Brussels, they really don't care about the national culture of the country, they don't care about the citizens, so they are adopting these directives and other legal acts without taking into consideration what the people do. So it might be against the process as such. It might also be against the legitimacy of some actors, saying, for example, well, these commissioners, nobody elected them, who are these people, but they decide for our future, and we don't have any way of really dealing with this. We have to apply what they decide. Who are they anyway to decide? So this is a typical populist rhetoric. We'll turn back to this a bit later. But this is a way, the populism comes first as a way to voice protest. It might be also a way to justify political action. We already spoke about this. A national politician saying, well, it's not my fault, I don't have any responsibility, it's the European Commission, it's the European Union, it's Europe. Well, you don't agree, we know, oh, it's awful, this directive, it will reduce, I don't know, for example, agricultural funds and whatever. This is what they decide. We have nothing to do with it. So this is the national versus European level in which they use this populist rhetoric to justify decisions that are not popular in their own country. Also, they can use the top-down argument, saying, well, this is a power, like supranational power coming from far. They take the decision, we just need to adopt them, we just need to introduce them in our own country. So basically, we are on the downside of the process, it's a top-down process, and someone else decided. Or if journalists ask them, well, you were there, you were voting on this, well, what did you do? They can always say, on national level at least, well, we were there, we voted against, but they still adopted it because it's a majority rule. So we lack influence on European level. This is another manner of using this populist rhetoric and as a tool on national level at least. Well, populism can also be a strategy against political opponents. If you're in opposition, you criticize the government because they accepted something proposed by Europe which is not good for your country or estimated as being a mistake. So the opposition can use it against the government. The MEPs can use populist rhetoric against the Commission, saying, well, you in the European Commission, you propose things without even knowing what is going on in our countries, but our voters tell us that it's nonsense to adopt this directive as such, so we don't agree. But anyway, because we are not, for example, part of the biggest groups, or even if we are against you, you adopt it anyway, because we don't have power to really amend it and with the basis of it. I mean, they can amend some details, but not the whole document as such. Or you can have ministers against other countries' representatives saying, well, we as Polish, Romanian, I don't know, Croatian now, we cannot do anything against Germany and France, because Germany and France are the only real countries that matter on European level. So they decided it. So we are weak and we cannot do anything. So their ministers or some other ministers, I don't know, whatever, they impose it on us. So since we lack influence, we cannot do anything. So it also can be the strategy of left against right, or the other way around. I mean, left-wing parties don't agree with austerity measures. So they say, well, because, you know, on the European level, right-wing parties and right-wing governments now are in power, in most of the countries, they impose on us measures that we don't accept. For example, so they with their, you know, ultra-liberal strategy or whatever. So it can be also left and right rhetoric. And then populism as an ideology, finally. Populism can also be used by parties who don't have really a position or a vision on this matter, but they can, you know, get popular by criticizing the others, by criticizing the government, by criticizing Europe. We have a lot of parties in each and every country called Eurosceptic, or I don't know, extreme right, or just populist parties that base their success on this type of rhetoric and this type of criticism. So, in general, we can see that populism works quite well. It works quite well for several reasons. We'll return back to this, especially in terms of crisis. But then we are now speaking of populism. We should define what is populism. So, what is this rhetoric that makes this strategy so successful? The definition, first, well, many scholars have concentrated on this issue, so there is no basic agreement in political science to define populism, but still there are some ways to deal with it. For some authors it's a strategy, for others it's more a rhetoric, so it's a way of presenting things and not really a way of doing things, so it's not a real strategy, it's more rhetoric. And other authors said that it can maybe even an ideology of, you know, people against elites and so. First question of definition is it really only a strategy, or is it also an ideology? And for different parties, it can be different things in different contexts. The main aspects of populism, anyway, are three most important, and the fourth it's optional and additional to that. First, it's a rhetoric of us versus them. It's always us, a big group of people, against them, the others. The others might be European elites, the others might be the government, the others might be immigrants, I don't know, Roma, whatever. But there is always this us as a group against the other. This is the first element of populist rhetoric. Second element, it's not only us versus the others. It's us, we are the good people, we have all the qualities in the world, we are wonderful, we are good, we are working hard, and so on and so on. And the elites, they are corrupt. They are, they have all, they do mismanagement, they only care about themselves. They are really bad and corrupt, yes. So it's always, in any case, against elites or against a group that is perceived to have some position on elitist level. Then it's combined very often with the call for direct democracy. So we, the good people, we need to get rid of this corrupted elite, and we need to get more direct democracy, get involved in the process, being the ones who really take the decision. So when you start speaking against the elite, you always have this question of how to make democracy more transparent, more direct to the people. And of course, some populist groups, not all of them, some populist parties, may also opt for a change of the system. We need to, you know, in order to introduce this democracy, we need to change the system as such. We need to get rid of the European Commission, for example. Why not ask the people to take all the decisions? Why not making referenda on each and every issue? Why not? You know, who are these people there with big salaries deciding on everything? So basically, it can go even as far as changing the system as such and putting into question the system. The main actors using this populist strategy are elected politicians, of course, because it works, it's within this communication with their electorate that populism is used, mainly. Of course, you can see it in some other cases, but this is the primary case. Ministers and prime ministers, of course, if it's a populism against Europe, they can use the justification, you already saw it. MEPs can use it also. justify their actions. And you can also have other people who are not directly involved in a political process, but they can also use populism as leaders of the opposition, political leaders in general, or even some opinion makers who defend this type of rhetoric. But basically, these are all people who are really in touch with the electorate, with the citizens directly. I mean, you can hardly have any populism on an expert level, for example, because they don't need it. It's just not something that they might use. And why is it an efficient tool then? Why should they use it? First, because when you have a crisis of legitimacy, like during the economic or political crisis in one country or in Europe in general, you have lack of legitimacy. Both on European level, European institutions are not legitimate actors anymore, or are put into question, or on the national level, the governments are put into question. Why? Because people lose their jobs, because the economic situation becomes very difficult, salaries are going down, the future is uncertain. So this means that political elites lack legitimacy, both on European and on national level, because decisions are taken on both levels. And then the economic crisis, of course, can worsen this type of rhetoric, because the economic crisis may push some actors, to find simple solutions and to say it's their fault. It's not a question of European crisis, Euro crisis, or economic crisis. It's just the elites, they are not capable of finding a solution. So you should blame them. Both on national level, because the national economy goes down and it's Europe's fault, for example, or because the purchase power of citizens goes down, so we can blame the government. It goes on different levels. And the lack of concrete results and viable solutions can also be a source, and populism can be used as an efficient tool against this type of phenomenon, on national and on European level. These elites, not only they are corrupt, they are incapable of solving the crisis, so we should really get rid of them. Or on national level, this government is really not capable of solving the problem, it's not defending national interests, so we should get rid of it. So it can really be efficient in many ways. So is it the crisis strengthening this populist discourse? We might think that yes, because the crisis is a moment where both European and national governments and representatives as such are put into question. The lack of legitimacy is there, and we will see further on. I have some data I'll show you the way it dropped since the Euro crisis, the economic crisis in general, but it was of course linked with the European crisis. The EU had a structural weakness to solve the problem. I think yesterday you had a lecture on this. Why we didn't make we didn't have the sufficient tools to resolve the crisis on EU level first. The Pact of Stability and its consequences on every single country, with stricter rules, which are difficult to apply on national level. Lack of solidarity between the North and the South. Germans don't want to pay for Greece. Dutch don't want to pay for Greece or for Cyprus or whatever. So all this creates a context in which we put into question the legitimacy of the political elites, etc., both on European and on national level. The pressure that the EU had during the crisis on national level is also part of this process. Why? Because the public debt and the balanced budget were obligations, especially for the countries that were in the Eurozone. So they implied very strict rules, and still are, especially the countries that are in a difficulty. In order to receive funds, they had to be very strict in these measures. And these measures were not really adapted to each and every single country. They were perceived, at least, as one-size-fits-all measures. So we decide that public debt should drop below this percentage. We decide that we should have a balanced budget with a deficit of 3% or whatever. So these measures were common to all the countries, but the situations in different countries is completely different and uncomparable. So in many countries, this provoked this populist backlash, saying, well, these governments and these European elites, they don't understand anything. Not only they lack solidarity, but they impose on us measures that are impossible to bear. This was a discourse, even on national level, between the elite. And of course, the interest rate in international markets additional, if you want, pressure to a country to adopt some sort of strategy. Often citizens are the ones that really suffer from it because they lose their job, because they lose their social benefits, and so on and so on. And this creates a good context for populist resort. Austerity measures and budget cuts, of course, creating unemployment, creating lower salaries, higher prices. People are not satisfied with this. So they can often turn to a populist saying, well, it's elite's fault. Let's remove them, let's change the system, let's introduce more democracy, it will all go perfectly well afterwards. So the impact, now we are seeing more or less the logic. Let's see the real impact of Euro crisis, especially focusing on CE countries, so Central and Eastern Europe. Why Central and Eastern Europe? I think because first, it's a topic that is less debated on European level, we focus, I think we tend to focus less on Central and Eastern Europe than on the problematic countries of the South, for example. But the economic in the Euro crisis had also an impact on these countries, and we could see that there was a populist backlash there as well. So what was this impact, and was it really so great, let's say, in the countries in question? Well, here we have some data, some tables for populist votes and Eurosceptic votes in these countries. What is nice to see and kind of interesting is that in most of the countries, actually the populist vote drops during the crisis. Amazingly and strangely, these parties were more powerful in the beginning of the years 2000 and less powerful now. The same goes for Eurosceptic parties. So, for one reason or another, during the crisis, this vote dropped in terms of political parties. Now, in terms of trusting parties, well, we can also see that this is comparison. So, the first table is on Western Europe, the second table is on Central and Eastern Europe, and the Baltics. So, what we can see then is that in some countries, well, you see first 2006, so before the crisis, and 2012, we can consider it as the end of the crisis, let's say, after all the process. It drops in, especially in two of the countries, well, Italy and Greece, it drops from 25 to 7, and in Italy from 26 to 4. But these are the countries that were really in the heart of the polemic, because they were really the ones suffering most from this process of economic crisis and Euro crisis. To the lesser extent, Spain, of course, was also, which was one of the countries that really had also very big economic problems. But many of the Western countries don't show the same fact. The legitimacy of parties stays more or less stable, and those of them who really put into question the power of parties are the ones that are that suffered the most from the crisis. So Greece, Italy, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and so on. And in Central and Eastern Europe, we can see that in some countries that were also suffering from the crisis, the effect is the same, but it's rather, I think, nuanced. In many countries, it goes even up, which means that parties are more legitimate after the crisis than before it, which is counterintuitive, but these are the facts. See, these are all Eurobarometer data. So, on the other hand, if we focus on the perception of corruption, because corruption was one of the main blames of populism, we also see that, in general, in most of the cases, the perception of corruption decreases during the crisis, and after, well, let's say by the end of the crisis, actually the perception of corruption is less than it used to be in 2006. There are three notable exceptions: Poland, Romania, and Lithuania. But they also, this process of economic and Euro crisis was mixed with political crisis in this country. So this might also explain this perception of corruption. But in Lithuania and Romania, for example, we can see that the difference is very, very little. So in general, this crisis didn't affect the perception of corruption. On the other hand, if we take a look to national economy and satisfaction with national economy in Central and Eastern Europe, we see that in most of the countries there is a lack of satisfaction. They were really, the perception of people were really changed during the crisis, and they are not satisfied with the way the economy goes nowadays. So there is a public pressure on governments to change this policy, to resolve the problems of, let's say, not only prices or income, but also the structural problems of economy. And the perspective of the future development of this economy is very pessimistic. This is also one of the results of the crisis. So people don't believe that Europe is a solution anymore. They just realize somehow in many countries that they have to manage all by themselves, and Europe is not a solution. And there are two types of solution on this crisis. Here I don't have the table for that, but it can be both national and European, but it's always against somehow putting into question the system. And then the satisfaction in EU policy. This is a table where you can see clearly that the disappointment from the EU in Central and Eastern Europe was very, very big. Well, we should take into account the fact that these were pro-European countries, most of them. They were really optimistic about Europe. They believed really for a long time that Europe would be a solution, and when they enter the European Union, everything will go perfectly well. Well, they realized during this crisis that this is not the case. And somehow this Euro dream was over during this crisis. It helped them realize that there is no European solution, and in some countries they started blaming Europe for the additional problems that they have, because Europe became kind of, let's say, not a solution but a burden for these economies and their governments, because it imposes strict rules, but if you have already a difficult situation, it makes it even more difficult. And this lack of trust, both in European institutions and on economic level, on the national governments, and lack of satisfaction might cause populist discourse. So, how do we use populism in the context of crisis? So this is the part where all the elements that we saw combine in a way, because this populist rhetoric that we saw in terms of definition was really used in most of these countries and everywhere in Europe during this context of crisis. Why was it used once again during a context of crisis? Because it can be a solution. So it can occur in different levels. It can occur on European level against the functioning of the system. You know, there are Eurosceptic parties in European Parliament criticizing the lack of democracy, lack of transparency, the way that the system is made, the fact that it doesn't work in times of crisis. They have to be changed. It can also be a populist discourse on national level against the EU. Also, many Eurosceptic parties in many countries saying, well, we have our national interest, we don't need to comply with the European Union, and the European Union doesn't care about our interest, our own national interest, so we have to change the system. And on national level, of course, you can also have a discourse by the opposition or some minor parties against the government. And the occasions that this populist discourse may occur during electoral campaigns, most of the times. These are the high points in terms of discourse, in terms of change, in terms of criticism. But also when you have important debates on an issue, a directive, a controversial issue, so it raises some dissatisfaction from below, from the citizens, and this can be used as a tool by some parties. Also public protest, even more. In general, this helps really the parties or the leaders that use populist discourse, or political or economic crisis during which people are dissatisfied, as we already see. So in this particular situation, populist discourse might work and might be very, very, very successful. So what is the populist discourse first on European level? What are the modalities? What do people say? What are the critics? Well, if we take all the elements we already defined as such, we'll see arguments for the nation, us versus them, being us as a nation, us as Poland, Romania, Croatia, whatever, against the European Union. So we need to focus on national interest, national sovereignty, not the EU. EU becomes an enemy. Or the people against European elites. We are the citizens who suffer from this crisis, but their European elites decide against our own will and without making consultation there in Brussels, well paid in their office, deciding for the future of Europe. They have no legitimacy. So us versus them, us the citizens versus European elites, or European citizens versus the bureaucrats. Also, this is even more specific than before, because the people versus European elites might also mean, us, the citizen, versus our ministers and prime ministers going to Brussels, taking decisions without really explaining and without justifying. And the corrupt elite versus the moral people, capitalists versus workers, for example. Well, capitalists won once again. They imposed very strict measures on the people, but the bank didn't pay anything. So these capitalist people, they won once again, for example. Or bureaucrats against the people. Bureaucrats always taking decisions, but they don't ask if the people are really satisfied or against this decision. Or elite versus the people, once again, similar rhetoric. People don't have their say in European matters. Direct democracy, critique of the non-elected European staff first. Who are these commissioners? Who elected them? Do you really know them? And who are these people? How do we decide who will be a European commissioner? And these people, they are extremely important because they are the ones drafting the decisions that will apply furthermore in all European Union. So, against the non-elected European staff, against the decision-making process as such, lack of transparency, lack of democracy, nobody asks the people until they have to apply the directive as such, so people are not involved in this process. Only the politicians are. Then, elite versus the people in general, so the elites are always deciding and the people is put aside, but the people pay the price for that. And lack of transparency in general, because many of the people just don't understand how Europe works and how these decisions are taken. So this might be, in some cases, once again, for a discourse on the change of the system. We have to change the system, we have to revise it, we have to make it different. So we have to, first, some Eurosceptic parties might say, we have enough of this ever closer union, of this European integration. We want our country to be independent. We want to take decisions all by ourselves. So we don't need all this process of negotiation, conciliation, and whatever. We want to take decisions for ourselves because we know better the situation in our own country. Or measures to defend the sovereignty, which is similar, which is not this time to revise the union as such, but to revise the power each state has on European level. Calls for more transparency, referenda, and so on and so on. So this is very theoretical in a way because it just shows how it might be used. Now, at this point of my presentation, I wanted to put a video with some populist discourse just to show you, like in real time, in real world, how it happens. But unfortunately, I couldn't. But there is some discourse of Michael Farage here. I won't read it, but there are things that are really a good illustration of what we just said. For example, this was 2010 during the plenary session of European Parliament. Those of you who are really interested, you can search for it on YouTube and look at him. Well, he says, Mr. President, you are certainly flexing your muscles.
If I may interrupt you, we may use YouTube if you wish. So
now,
if you wish.
Well,
if
I don't know if
it's needed, so yeah.
It might be nice because it will save us some time, but I don't know if it will work now. For now. Well, it's always better to see it with the image because it's not only the discourse as such. Even though here I underlined already the elements that are really related to it. another one as well because he always criticizes this. And then,
You've been in office for 1 year, and in that time, the whole edifice is beginning to crumble. There's chaos. The money's running out. I should thank you. Look around this chamber this morning. Just look at these faces. Look at the fear. Look at the anger. Paul Barroso here looks like he's seen a ghost. You know, they're beginning to understand that the game is up. And yet, in their desperation to preserve their dream, they want to remove any remaining traces of democracy from the system. And it's pretty clear that none of you have learned anything. You know, when you yourself, Mr. Van Rompuy, say that the euro has brought us stability, I suppose I could applaud you for having a sense of humour, but isn't this really just the bunker mentality? You know, your fanaticism is out in the open. You talked about the fact that it was a lie to believe that the nation state could exist in a 21st century globalised world. Well, that may be true in the case of Belgium, who haven't had a government for 6 months, but for the rest of us, right across every member state in this union, and perhaps this is why we see the fear in the faces, increasingly people are saying, we don't want that flag, we don't want the anthem, we don't want this political class, we want the whole thing consigned to the dustbin of history. And we had a great tragedy earlier on this year, and now we have a situation in Ireland. Now I know that the stupidity and greed of Irish politicians has a lot to do with this. They should never ever have joined the euro. They suffered with low interest rates, a full spoon, and a massive bust. But look at your response to them. What they're being told, as their government's collapsing, is that it would be inappropriate for them to have a general election. In fact, Commissioner Wren here said they had to agree their budget first before they'd be allowed to have a general election. Just who the hell do you think you people are? You are very, very dangerous people indeed. Your obsession with creating this euro state means that you're happy to destroy democracy. You appear to be happy for millions and millions of people to be unemployed and to be poor. Untold millions must suffer so that your euro dream can continue. Well, it won't work, because it's Portugal next, with their debt levels of 325% of GDP. They're the next ones on the list, and after that, I suspect it will be Spain. And the bailout for Spain would be 7 times the size of Ireland, and at that moment, all of the bailout money has gone. There won't be any more. But it's even more serious than economics, because if you rob people of their identity, if you rob them of their democracy, then all they are left with is nationalism and violence. I can only hope and pray that the Euro project is destroyed by our markets before that really happens.
Okay, so this is a good illustration of what we just talked about. He's one of the most famous, Eurosceptic politicians now in the European level, really using this sort of discourse. So this you have here is his speech. Well, there are other examples. I try to search for examples from most of the countries that you come from. For this anti-Euro discourse, well, here first it's Netherlands. It's a note made by the Netherlands government saying that the time of an ever closer union in every possible policy area is behind us, that the Dutch people are disconnected with the European Union, that finally the decision to take action at EU level is made only if it's necessary and not in the interest of the participating parties, which is countries, which is their population most of all, and the European Union. We need a European Union that is much more modest. Well, in Poland you might have a discourse even from some officials that goes in this size. I'm not saying that Marek Belka is a populist, but what I'm saying is that this discourse you can also find on national level. It's not really related only to Eurosceptic or to extreme right parties. Well, saying that EU can marginalize us a bit, much more difficult with the new EU integrated eurozone to enter it. Or in Belgium, Parti Populaire in their statement, the program, they also have put these measures and you renegotiate the European treaties, make it more democratic and respectful. Supranational European state ruled by unelected officials is a very bad thing, and so on and so on. So you have the similar discourse in many countries. If you look for by yourself, you might find it, and it's really very present everywhere across Europe. What about? We can also have, so this was Nigel Farage. We can also have this discourse on national level. Here something is wrong because of. Yes. You can also have this discourse on national level because also some politicians may blame the political elites on national level and the government for not respecting the will of the people and not putting into practice some measures that are really against the national interest. And you also have different examples. What I chose here were examples from Poland, especially that show that this discourse existed much before the crisis, and it's only intensified by the crisis, but it was still there in terms of defense of national interest, in terms of criticizing the system as such, the way it was built from the previous elites. So basically, this discourse was already existent, but the political crisis and the economic crisis made it even worse. Made people say that we can become a colony of the European Union. People are not listened to anymore, but they have to pay the price for all this. So what can we conclude in seeing how this populist discourse is used during the economic and financial crisis all over Europe? So why is this decision-making process really so problematic, and why this discourse really works in most of the countries? First, the populist discourse have become more present on EU level after the start of the crisis. Why? Because in many cases, even on national level, people realize that European Union as such, as a system of institutions working together, negotiating together, didn't have the structures and didn't have the opportunity to solve this crisis on European level, which created, of course, this populist discourse. It created it even within parties that are not populist as such, and they didn't use it as such before. So there is also, of course, a general lack of satisfaction not only with the present moment, but the trust in the future. In many cases, on national level, is very low. People became pessimistic. They started thinking, well, maybe the golden years of our economies are behind us, and it will get worse and worse with the time. So what should we do? We should try and transform this system. We should get rid of these elites who don't want to put the adequate measures to solve these problems. We need to change the system as a whole and the way it functions. So the European decision-making process is part of this untransparent system as such. So many of the Eurosceptic populist parties using this type of rhetoric became very powerful, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe as well, and this creates the kind of this discourse becomes mainstream because this creates a whole wave of dissatisfaction all over Europe. And of course, this crisis shows that showed to many people that not only in terms of decision making, European Union lacks legitimacy because people don't understand how decisions are made and don't understand if their interest is taken into account, but in terms of efficient policies too, because as we saw, people are not satisfied by the way this crisis was dealt with on European level. So they say, well, we need to change the system, we need to make it more efficient in one way or another, which might provoke populist discourse. And the populist tendency, of course, as we saw, was present before the crisis in many countries. And we saw on the graph that many of these type of parties using this discourse even declined in Central and Eastern Europe during the crisis instead of growing up. But the generalizing of this type of discourse, even on mainstream parties, even the parties that were defending the European Union before, this is really what happened during and after the crisis. This tendency, of course, doesn't concern only Eastern Europe, but goes as well for Western Europe, or even more, because populism was already present in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe it became a relatively new phenomenon, because the political class is not put into question in these countries. And if you want to reverse the tendency in both EU and national level, we have to take into account the fact that people are not satisfied and there are problems with the legitimacy of this decision-making process. So, just a small illustration here as well. I already showed you some trends. I don't know if you can see from the back, but the blue line is net trust in national governments in the EU 27. So it starts in the beginning of the crisis until 2010, and it basically shows that trust in national government, this is the first graph, figure 1, is below 0 on average in all European countries. So this is a very, very important thing to understand and to take into account during the crisis. Because people basically don't trust their national government in terms of measures to be taken to resolve the crisis. We can see that the trust in the European Commission also drops during the crisis, but it's still positive, though, so it didn't pass below the 0. But it drops also in a more or less drastic manner. Second figure here, it's the parliament. So, because we might say, okay, people don't trust the elites, they don't trust the government, they don't trust the commission, but they might trust the parliament because these are the representatives of the people. These are the people they really need and can have a possibility to take into account the basic problems of the people. But it drops as well. As we can see, once again, net trust in national parliaments in all the European Union is below 0. So it's negative. People don't trust the national parliament. In most of the European countries, during the crisis, it goes even further and below the levels that it had before. Net trust in European Parliament also drops, but kind of stays in a level which is still positive, even though it's close to 0. So it's like 10 points, which is not that much. And especially in countries that suffered a lot by the crisis. Here we can see Spain, Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. And this is really the phenomenon that we are interested in if you want to understand the way populism works. You can see how it drops. It's really the trust in national parliament in these countries really dropped much below 0. So here we are in Ireland at -70, which is really like people don't trust at all the national parliament. And in most of the countries, you can see that it's not only below zero, but it's on levels never seen before. This is the fact to take into account if you want to understand why populist rhetoric might be so successful. And this is a trend kind of related to the European and the economic crisis as well. Even though we saw that, of course, this is not the only reason, and this existed already before as a tendency. So, just to conclude shortly on what we just said, is populism a danger for the democracy and the European Union? Is this discourse putting into question the legitimacy of all both the elites on national and on European level a danger for democracy? There are two answers. The question can be answered both ways. Well, first possible answer is yes. Well, it is a danger for the democracy and the European Union. Why? Because it undermines the legitimacy of the democratic system as such. As we saw, many of these parties, many of these leaders using this populist rhetoric, they criticize also the way the system works. So they criticize the representative democracy on the national level, they criticize the European decision-making process, and they want to change. So it undermines the overall legitimacy of all the known political actors in the European and the national scene. It also tends to offer simple questions to difficult problems. They all say, well, if we change the elites, if we get rid of them, it will all go well. Or if we open the European decision-making process to people and make more referenda, we don't let these European commissioners and non-elected staff decide all by themselves, then it will all go well. It needs only to be revised and it will go all perfectly. But this is a simple solution because it doesn't take into account the complexity of the system beyond the European Union, beyond the national level, beyond the politics as such, because it's also an economic process and it's a global economic process. So basically you cannot only say that it's a politician's fault or it's a commission's fault or it's a fault of one of the actors. It's a global process and they tend to offer simple solutions which might be misleading for the people. And the third danger, and maybe the most important danger for democracy, is that they consider people as a homogeneous group. We are the people, we are all together, we all share exactly the same views on all the issues. So there are no differences between us. We are all the same. And we are considered to be the same. The ones, and if you have differences in this inner group, they're not taken into account. So if you don't agree with one of the decisions proposed by these people, well, they might ignore you or say that you don't belong to this group anymore. They may exclude you as well. And this is very, very dangerous for democracy. Why? Because, well, if you have minority opinion or if you have minority identity within the society, it's not taken into account. It's us versus them, us as a homogeneous group. We're not different between us. We're all the same. We all agree on the same things. And if this is not the case, then if you say, well, I don't agree with you, I still belong to the group, for example, I don't know, I'm Polish, Romanian, but I don't agree with what you're saying, then you become against us then. You are not belonging to this group anymore, and this might lead to really exclusion of some of the minorities. And this changes the whole process, because if we consider the society as homogeneous, then we don't have to debate anymore, because one person can can incarnate the whole society as such. His opinion is the opinion of everybody. This is a very dangerous logic. And if we apply it to some process, it might go very, very far. On the other hand, of course, populism is not a danger for democracy in the EU and the different countries, because in a way it puts pressure on the elites to take decisions that are not especially well thought of, or to modify the system and make it more transparent. This is a good thing, because if we don't change the system and we leave it as such, and we don't focus on the problems, that we will never evolve and we'll never make it, will never improve. So this might be a good thing if it's not applied in the wholeness of the idea of power theory. Because it puts some pressure on the elites, and finally they take into consideration some unpopular let's say proposals and others, unpopular for them, of course, or on the European level. It expresses the dissatisfaction of the citizens, which is also one good thing, because it's a way of saying, well, please be careful, because your power is given by the people, but we can take it back. And be careful in what you're doing, because we're following your steps. And if you don't follow our interests, we can also reverse and change the system or not vote for you on the next elections and whatever. So in a way of expressing the dissatisfaction, a way of voicing, let's say, criticism as such, this can be beneficial. And it might eventually lead to a democratization of a complex system, which is the EU system, especially on European level. Many people don't understand how it works. That's why they put it into question. So it may lead, of course, to some improvements in terms of transparency, in terms of representative democracy. But it still, of course, remains an open question if populism is a good thing or not. If populist rhetoric finally may lead to this changes for improving the system or might destroy it as such. I think, in my opinion, we can speak about this during the discussion, but it's a question of measure. So it might be a good thing if it's not applied in general by a government or on the whole system as such, in the way it is. So if we want really to conclude on this issue, we might say that this is a process we need to take into account. This is a process really made worse by the European crisis and the economic crisis, but this is in general a process that was going on the European and on national level even before that, and it's a process we really need to examine closely in order to deal with it in the best way. Well, thank you for your attention. And yes?
Well, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, where do you think is the red line between legitimate criticism and populism, first of all? Then, for example, you talked about the matter of democracy or more direct democracy, or there are enough examples. But all the critiques towards the democratic government will fall under the classification of populism. Catch-all definition. Just a technical question, for example, I wanted to know when you refer to your graphics to populist parties and the decline of votes. Who do you refer to in Bulgaria, for example? Do you refer to extremist parties or more the mainstream parties? Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this is, I think, one of the most difficult questions when one deals with populism. We tend to see populism everywhere because it's a phenomenon that it's very complex. But in a simple manner, this type of rhetoric you can see it everywhere. You can see it also applied by general actors. That's why I tended to present it as a rhetoric and not as an ideology. Well, there are parties using it as an ideology because they don't have other identity or they have an extremist identity. But in general, populist rhetoric can be seen everywhere. What is the difference between a critique, legitimate critique, and populism? I think the difference comes when you take into account the complexity of the system and the diversity between the actors, and still you voice some criticism. This is not populism. But if you only say, if you simplify the rhetoric and you say it's us versus them, us the good people against the corrupted elites, and we want to make the system point, this doesn't take into account neither its complexity, neither its functioning as such. And this is where populism starts. It can have, well, some scholars argue that you have different levels of populism. So you can have, like, what we say, I don't know, thin populism. Let's say, well, sometimes all the political actors might use this form of thin populism, especially during campaigns because they criticize their opponents. Or you can say that there is the other side is hard populism, where you base all your vision of society on this populist view. And there are, of course, differences. I think that the main thing is this. The main thing is simplifying a complicated process and not taking into account the divergence of actors, the diversity of what you might have as point of view, and reducing all the problems to it's elite's fault, it's the government's fault, it's EU fault. This is not an explanation. This is populism. And beyond that, of course, if you have a party that uses this all the time as a general rhetoric, then of course you might consider it as populist party. One other difficulty with populism is that it evolves with the time. If you are populist at the moment, the next election you might not be anymore. So this is not like socialism or liberalism or any other ideology. When you adopt it and you stay as such, you have your principles and they are like this from here to the end of your career or whatever. Populism is dynamic and it changes. It changes both on level, on degree, and it changes in terms of how you use it and what is its place in your own party's ideology or whatever. But this is a good question because this is a difficult one. And one should always be aware of that yes, it's a rhetoric, but from rhetoric to consider one party populist is another. And it's more difficult. When it comes to Bulgaria, well, thank you for this because my thesis is on that. Well, I would, this is a personal opinion, of course, this is not, there are other scholars who might disagree, but I would classify movement X movements in Simon II movement Stability and Progress in the first part of this, in the first legislation, 2001-2005, as populist party, not in the second one because it goes away from this discourse. And I would consider Citizens for European, the development of Bulgaria as a populist party, still. And if now I don't know if I can turn back to the graph, but you might see that in Bulgaria it goes up. Contrary to, there are other examples as well. Now it's a detail, but Bulgaria is one of the exceptions because in many other countries like Poland, I don't know, well, the Czech Republic is another exception because now they have for the first time a real populist party or considered as such. But in Poland, for example, it was much stronger during the beginning of the years 2000. In Romania, well, once again, you have now a truly populist party maybe, but but still, this was much stronger in the years 2000 than this is now in general. Well, of course, one may debate on each and every country, but this was just the tendency of what we consider to be the most populist parties. Most of them were extreme right. In other countries, Bulgaria, once again, it's a different. Attack is also another, can be considered as populist, but not purely populist because it also has this extreme right, nationalist, radical nationalist identity. But enough on Bulgaria because your colleagues might be a bit bored. Other questions? On populism or definitions in general? Yes?
Could you make a connection between populism in Central and Eastern Europe and populism in Latin America, for instance, considering the fact that in the populist discourses there is this tendency to see the European Union as a colony? So, could you make a connection between the two regions?
I think that there are a lot of connections really between the two, even though of course the context in Latin America is a bit different.
Yeah.
The enemy is not the same. Let's say. In Latin America, we blame the US, we blame the globalized economic system. In Europe, it's different. And in Europe, if you want, especially the populists that are criticizing the European Union, they have a point because people might see that European directive on sugar, I don't know, whatever, is applied everywhere. But you don't know how this decision is taken. So they have a point here. They have a point saying, well, this is not transparent, elites are doing what they want. This is not the same in Latin America. In Latin America, it's more, well, we've been dominated by elites who are not close to the people for long, and they didn't really care for the interest of the people. But it's more, on one hand, it's more related to the national level as such, and less to the external level, even though they criticize the US and other actors. But basically, it's based on national level. Let's change the elites and then we'll go. In Central and Eastern Europe, in Europe in general, you have both European and national levels. This is one of the differences, and it goes on both levels. First thing, and second thing, in Latin America, I think, contrary to the Central and Eastern Europe, you can see left-wing populism, even though, well, now we can debate if it's left-wing, right-wing, both. It's kind of difficult to really classify, but you have some left-wing elements that you don't have in Central Eastern Europe for historical reasons. Because in Central and Eastern Europe for long it was, I don't know, not really accepted to make a real left-wing 40s or 30s. I mean, people were kind of reticent on that. Other questions? I know you're tired and probably a bit hungry, so if you don't have other questions, we might end here. No? Well, thank you very much once again for the attention.